Welcome to Scriptura's layer-by-layer overview of Psalm 78. Listen, my people, to my teaching. Let me open up my mouth with a parable. Let me pour out puzzling problems from long ago, so that the latest generation might put their trust in God, that they might not forget God's deeds, and might not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation who did not keep their heart committed, and whose mind was not faithful to God. God performed miracles in the land of Egypt, but they sinned against him. They put God to the test in their heart. They sinned again and did not trust in his wonderful deeds. So he made them spend their days in vain and their years in anguish. How often did they rebel against him in the wilderness? How often did they grieve him in the desert? God rejected the tent of Joseph and did not choose the clan of Ephraim, but he chose the clan of Judah. He chose David. Psalm 78 starts with hope. It uncovers a parable, a story that teaches a lesson, and puzzling problems from long ago. But the story is long and discouraging. Again and again and again, the people's ancestors sinned and refused to trust God. In anger, God brought judgment, but the people never became truly loyal. In the end, God rejected the old leadership of Joseph's tribe, Ephraim. He turned to a new place for leadership, the tribe of Judah, the shepherd David. The parable is of a flock that could only wander away in rebellion until it came to its true shepherd. There is hope, but only if the people choose to follow David as their shepherd. Because the psalm ends by presenting David as the answer to the generations of rebellion, we have chosen "rebellion solved" as the memorable phrase for this psalm. The ancestors' rebellion seemed endless, and no solution ever really worked, until David became king. Psalm 78 has 5 sections: a parable, rebellion in the wilderness, a temporary solution, rebellion in the promised land, and a permanent solution. The introduction we've called a parable. In it, the psalmist addresses the current generation with authority. Listen and pass on this parable our ancestors told us. Remembering what our ancestors did is how we will not forget God's deeds. Instead, we will put our hope in him. Early in the psalm, we see that the ancestors are complicated. They passed on the history of what God had done. However, they also failed to trust in God, even though he revealed his character and provided for his people by powerful deeds. Even though the ancestors were unfaithful, this section is filled with hope. If the current generation pays attention to the message of this psalm, there is still hope that they will put their trust in God and obey his commands. The main body opens with the section we have called Rebellion in the Wilderness. It begins with the tribe of Ephraim, descendants of Joseph. They were one of the most powerful and numerous tribes, and they were the natural leaders of Israel. But these powerful leaders fled from battle. They rebelled against their God because they had forgotten his wondrous power. They behaved no differently from their ancestors in the wilderness. In the wilderness, the people saw with their own eyes how God provided over and over. In spite of this, they grumbled. Is God able to provide a table of food for us? Can he give us not just water, but bread too? Even meat? The miracles did not lead to the people trusting God. Instead, they showed how people continued to doubt that God would provide like he promised. By grumbling, the people tested God and doubted his covenant promises. By doubting, they were rebelling against him. The psalmist shows his astonishment at how short-sighted the people were. In response, the Lord became furious. But first, he proved his kindness once again. He brought bread from heaven and lots of meat, The food was everywhere, so they ate and were completely satisfied. But while the food was still in their mouths, God proved his justice. He punished them by killing some of their young men. The section ends with a sense of awe at the contrast between God's constant provision and the people's constant rebellion, a rebellion so great it deserved death. This contrast is the heart of the puzzling problems mentioned in the introduction. The people did not learn from God's judgment. They sinned again and did not trust in his wonders. Sometimes they acted like they honored God as their rock and redeemer, but they were not truly committed to him. As a result, God denied them entrance into the land he promised them. Instead, he forced them to wander in the wilderness the rest of their lives. However, this wandering was actually God showing compassion. It was a temporary solution. He did not pour out all of his anger on them, even though they rebelled. The years of wandering enabled God to give the next generation the opportunity to inherit the promises instead. This could only happen after the current generation passed away. The section ends on a feeling of solemnity or reverence. This severe solution wove together God's judgment and compassion. The next section we've called Rebellion in the Promised Land. Even with the new generation, nothing changed since the rebellion in the wilderness. The section begins with a lament, a song of grief filled with contempt or disrespect for the ancestors. The psalmist cries out, "How often did they rebel against him in the wilderness? Again, they put God to the test, and they provoked the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his strength, the day in which he saved them from an adversary." If they had remembered how God had saved them, they would have trusted him. But they did not. With growing solemnity, the section lists out the exact miracles God did, but they had forgotten or not seen how important they were. All the plagues God used to destroy the food and drink of the Egyptians contrast with all the food and drink God provided for his own people in the wilderness. In Egypt, which was a land of plenty, God destroyed the food and water of Israel's enemies. In the wilderness, where not much can grow, God provided abundant food and water for Israel. God clearly showed the difference between his enemies, whose provision he destroyed, and his people for whom he cared. But his people did not understand, and so it was like they forgot what God had done for them. The final plague, killing every firstborn in Egypt, was both the greatest judgment on rebellious Egypt and the moment of salvation for Israel. It led to Israel's final exit from Egypt. God led his people like a flock of sheep, led by a shepherd who would protect them from all danger and bring them to their new home, the promised land. God revealed both his justice by judging the rebellious people of Egypt, as well as his provision for his own people. Surely they would see his actions and trust him once they reached their own land? But even in the promised land, they rebelled. Just like their ancestors in the wilderness, they tested God, went astray, and were unfaithful. As the poem recalls God carefully guiding his flock out of Egypt, the words are full of confidence. That confidence gives way to disgust for how his people rejected him in the promised land, turning instead to idols, carved images, and high places. God responds to rebellion consistently. Just like in the wilderness, he was furious in the promised land. Because of this rebellion, he was so furious, he completely rejected Israel. He even abandoned the tabernacle at Shiloh, where the people worshipped the Lord. Shiloh was in Ephraimite land. Under the leadership of the Ephraimites, rebellion only continued. With growing alarm, the psalm retells how God gave his people over to the sword, let fire consume the young men, and even let his priests fall by the sword. The situation might seem hopeless because the pattern of rebellion never seems to stop. But hope returns when the Lord himself rises up, like a warrior shouting from the effects of wine. With great energy and strength, he first defeats his enemies who are endangering his people. Then he addresses the problem within Israel. He removes the Ephraimites, the tribe of Joseph, from leadership. Their leadership has only led to more rebellion. Instead, he chooses a new leader from the tribe of Judah. The Ephraimites' failed leadership was the cause for the people's continuing rebellion. Now, the full parable is clear. If the people are like a flock of sheep, then they need their shepherd. But they need the right shepherd. The Ephraimites were not the right shepherds, but David is the shepherd God has chosen. He began in the sheep pen, caring for his flock of woolly sheep, but he became a shepherd of God's human flock. The dishonest leadership before him led to the people forgetting God's deeds and worshiping idols. David, by contrast, leads his flock with the integrity of his heart, meaning his heart is honest and pure. Once the wrong shepherds were removed and the right shepherd, David, was in place, the flock could finally thrive. The sheep were in need of the right shepherd. Psalm 78 uses the frame of a parable and puzzling problems. The parable is about a flock of sheep that keeps wandering astray until they're finally brought to its true shepherd. The puzzling problems are what happened without that right leadership. Although God provided extravagantly, the people continued to respond with rebellion. They refused to believe he was showing them his character, that they could trust he would fulfill his covenant promises. In the wilderness, the food should have brought joy, thankfulness, and trust in their God. Instead, it brought grumbling, disbelief, and judgment. God's temporary solution was to destroy the rebels, but only some of them. Even though he killed some right away, the rest he allowed to wander in the wilderness until the next generation grew up. The rebellious generation died, but the next generation would have another opportunity to live by God's covenant. However, in the promised land, the next generation continued to rebel. The solution clearly did not work for long. They did not learn to trust God because of how he provided for their ancestors in the wilderness. They also paid no attention to their history as the people God brought out of Egypt. God often identified himself as the God who brought them out of Egypt. In this psalm, he destroyed Egypt's food and water in order to bring Israel out and make them his own people. God brought his people to their new home. He drove out their enemies from before them. They owed everything to him. What was their response? They did not trust him or obey him, but instead worshipped idols. Like in the wilderness, God again destroyed the rebels. But this time he destroyed the leadership, the tribe of Joseph, the Ephraimite leadership. In their land, he destroyed Shiloh, where the Ark of the Covenant had been. He even destroyed the priests that served him there. Once he removed the problematic leadership, God gave the final solution for the rebellious flock: a true shepherd. This shepherd would be able to lead the flock skillfully, with wisdom and integrity. The psalm ends with poetic imagery, reminding the people that David's first job was a shepherd of sheep. David was taken from his own sheep pen to become a shepherd over God's people. The meaning is simple. If the flock will follow their new shepherd, they will escape the endless rebellion and begin to enjoy the life of the covenant. Some background information will be helpful for understanding this psalm. The Old Testament is full of the shepherd imagery as a metaphor for leadership. The prophet Ezekiel spoke against shepherds who did not take care of their flock, but only took care of themselves. In Jeremiah, God calls his people to return to him, and he will give them shepherds after my own heart, who will lead you with knowledge and understanding. These would be leaders who guide the nation according to God's law. We should recognize that the image of a flock and its shepherd is often referring to leadership and not simply an illustration. It describes the responsibility of those in power to protect, provide for, and lead the people. In ancient times, when a father died, his final blessing for his children shaped the future of the family. When Jacob, or Israel, died, he left a blessing that highlighted two of his children, Judah and Joseph. Judah was blessed with official leadership. Jacob told him, "Your father's sons will bow down to you, and the scepter, the king's staff, will not depart from Judah." However, Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, so he received the most generous blessings. Jacob called him the prince among his brothers. Even in Genesis 49, when Jacob gave these blessings, there's tension between the roles of the two brothers. Judah is officially the leader, but Joseph is the prince among his brothers. As the 12 tribes traveled to the promised land, one of Joseph's half-tribes, Ephraim, often took on leadership. For example, Moses' successor, Joshua son of Nun, was from Ephraim. Once in the promised land, the tabernacle and priesthood were established at Shiloh, in the land of Ephraim, from the line of Joseph. Because Ephraim provided most of the leadership at this time, the name Ephraim can be used to stand for the leadership of Israel at that time. During the time when the judges ruled, however, Israel repeatedly worshipped foreign gods and was unfaithful to the Lord, the God who'd brought them out of Egypt. As judgment for this unfaithfulness, God repeatedly let foreign nations defeat them. Eventually, the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant, which symbolized God's presence among his people. God let enemies destroy Shiloh itself. It would never be restored. The destruction of Shiloh and the Ephraimites who lived there was a response to the unfaithfulness of the leadership. The people use that story as a warning against future unfaithfulness. In Psalm 78, the Ephraimites are described as armed with a bow and as shooters of the bow. They were archers. These archers are said to have turned back, meaning to have fled on a day of battle. This means that they did not continue to fight as warriors should, but instead they turned and fled. Why? The psalm says they fled because they did not trust their God. They fled out of fear, afraid that God would not protect them. They did not have the courage to stand and fight. This is one of the puzzling problems. How could such strong and courageous Ephraimite warriors fail to trust that their God, the God of wonders, would provide? This sets the tone for the rest of the psalm. The answer comes in that initial tension in Jacob's blessing. Joseph was favored and blessed, which is shown in Ephraim's strength and leadership at the beginning. Even so, true leadership was destined for Judah. Israel would only flourish when they recognized that God chose Judah to lead. When God chose David from the tribe of Judah, it finally resolved the tension. A parable is a type of speech where a long story or discussion has a specific message it is teaching. The message is the important part. The long story is used to illustrate the main message. When Psalm 78 opens with a parable, it should prepare the people for a large part of the poem to be driven by one main message. Because of this, the hearer or reader is prepared to understand the stories of Israel's history as parts of a larger message. They're not just celebrations of what God did in the past. The psalm also mentions puzzling problems. These are events that confuse the mind and require wisdom to understand. In other words, puzzling problems occur when someone does not immediately understand what God is doing. An incomplete understanding will lead to the wrong conclusions. This cautions the audience against jumping to conclusions. Just because God provides for his people, it does not mean he is happy with them. Just because he punishes them, it does not mean he has rejected them. Even when he kills some of his people, he has not given up on them. The opening of Psalm 78 announces both a parable and puzzling problems. This prepares the reader to understand Psalm 78 as a complex poem addressing difficult questions, but with one main message. The main message is the solution to the parable of repeated rebellion. The puzzling problems are the constant interactions between God and the ancestors, which, on their own, would not make much sense. But if we look at these problems with the wisdom of the larger story, however, they can make sense. Two of the most important words in Psalm 78 are remember and forget. Most of the psalm is about how the ancestors forgot God's deeds, meaning they ignored or neglected them. They acted like God's deeds were meaningless and did not prove his faithful care for them. Even the structure of the psalm acts out this forgetting. In verse 11, the ancestors forgot his wonders which he had shown them in the land of Egypt. Then the poem skips over all the wonders in Egypt, as if the poem itself had forgotten them. But later, in verses 43 and afterward, those wonders are remembered and recited. Precisely those wonders God did when he provided for Israel. This happens after the word remember has occurred 3 times, in verses 35, 39, and 42. This creates a small version of Psalm 78's message. For a while, the ancestors did forget God, and they suffered judgment because they forgot. After a time, however, they remembered God, even if they only remembered him imperfectly. But the most important part is that God remembered them. Although he punished their rebellion at first, eventually he arose like a warrior to save them. He knew they would always rebel under their old leaders. He had always planned to provide a new leader from the clan of Judah. Everything would begin to change with David. David is also the answer to another puzzle, focusing on a flock of sheep being guided by a shepherd's staff. The word zon, a city representing Egypt, sounds very similar to the Hebrew word for flock, zon. From Egypt through the wilderness, God was leading his flock in search of a new home for them and the right shepherd. There's another wordplay with the word shevet. In Hebrew, this word is used to mean tribe, a shepherd's rod or staff, or even a king's scepter. At first, the tribe, or shevet, of Ephraim was leading the flock, but they failed. God did not choose that tribe, but instead chose the tribe, or shepherd's staff, of Judah. Long ago, Jacob's blessing in Genesis 49 promised that the scepter, or shevet, the shepherd's staff of leadership, would always belong to Judah. God was leading the sheep, the tzon, to the shepherd, the one holding the shevet. Only then would the sheep be properly cared for. Psalm 78 was likely written shortly after David became king. It celebrated that God chose David to solve the problem of the generations of rebellion. It explained to all Israel why it was David who was the right king. It answered questions like why David took the place of the old Ephraimite leadership, and why David's capital was used instead of the old shrine at Shiloh. David and his dynasty, his family line, were the shepherds God had chosen. God had been preparing his people for them ever since Jacob gave his blessing to Judah. The message is that the pattern of rebellion can stop if the Lord's people will follow the chosen one, David, as their shepherd. Looking at the following history, this argument might seem short-sighted. There was a golden era under David and Solomon, but after that there was still rebellion. David and his family line did not prevent the nation going into exile, after all. Later Psalms struggle with this difficult truth. To understand their solutions, we must remember how imagery and symbolism work in poetry. David often refers to more than the shepherd boy, David. It also refers to his descendants. The idea of a son of David yet to come, who would personally be the true final solution, is a common theme in the Old Testament. This theme is the background for how Jesus presented himself in the New Testament. People were confident that someone from David's line would be the answer to everything. The details would only be revealed later in history. But it all began with David the shepherd boy, whom God chose to shepherd his people. Please note that this video provides only one coherent interpretation of the psalm. See our website for details on other interpretations as well, including identifying the participants in verses 28, 63, and 64, and 68 for